Power does not vanish when you stop looking at it. It doesn't dissolve when you call yourself free. It doesn't retreat because you refuse to name it. Power only changes hands. There is a comforting story we are taught early in life, that obedience is a virtue, that neutrality is safety, that if we avoid conflict, power will simply pass us by. That as long as no one is barking orders at us, we must be free. But history tells a quieter, darker truth. Every society, every institution, every relationship operates within a hierarchy, visible or invisible, formal or unspoken. And the most effective hierarchies are the ones you don't feel pressing against your throat. They feel natural, inevitable, like gravity. You wake up at the same time. You speak carefully in certain rooms. You censor thoughts before they reach your mouth. You feel anxiety at the idea of standing out, not because someone threatened you, but because you learned what happens to those who do. No chains, no commands, just patterns, and patterns are rarely accidental. Most people believe they are free because no one openly rules them, yet their behavior is remarkably predictable. They want what they are told is respectable. They fear what they are told is dangerous. They repeat opinions that signal belonging. They punish themselves for thoughts that don't fit. This is not oppression in the dramatic sense. It is something far more efficient: unconscious submission. Power does not need to shout when it can whisper. It does not need force when it has incentives. It does not need violence when it has shame, status, and exclusion. The uncomfortable truth is this: the majority of control in human history has not been enforced, it has been accepted, internalized, defended. Those who obey often believe they are choosing obedience. Those who conform believe they are being moral. Those who submit believe they are being reasonable. And the system hums along smoothly, not because people are evil, but because they are unaware. Throughout history, there are echoes of those who trusted the rules and paid the price. Leaders who played fair in rigged games. Idealists who believed virtue alone could protect them. Advisors who told the truth too late. Citizens who followed the script right up until they became expendable. They all made the same mistake. They assumed power was bound by the same rules they were. Long before anyone dared to say this openly, there were observers, not rebels, not tyrants, but students of human behavior. People who noticed something deeply unsettling. Power does not reward goodness. It rewards awareness, and it punishes innocence mercilessly. These observers did not claim the world should be this way. They simply noticed that it was. They saw that those who refused to understand power were not spared by it, they were consumed by it. That pretending hierarchies didn't exist did not abolish them. It only ensured someone else would sit at the top. This is where the real tension begins. Because once you accept that power is always present, you are left with an uncomfortable choice, one most people never consciously make. You either learn how power moves, or you become something it moves through. To rule does not necessarily mean to dominate others, and to be ruled does not always mean to wear chains. Often, being ruled looks like compliance you rationalize, silence you call wisdom, fear you mistake for morality. The most dangerous power structures are not the brutal ones history condemns, but the invisible ones history forgets to name. Which brings us to the question most people avoid asking themselves: if no one rules you, why are your choices so easy to predict? Why do millions feel the same outrage at the same time? Why do reputations rise and collapse on cue? Why does stepping outside the invisible line feel so risky, even when no law forbids it? This documentary is not about empowerment slogans or heroic fantasies. It is not about becoming ruthless, cruel, or dominant. It is about seeing the world as it actually operates, not as we wish it did. Because the moment you understand that rule or be ruled is not a threat, but a diagnosis, something changes. You stop asking whether power exists, and start asking where it's flowing, and more importantly, whether it's flowing through you or around you. Machiavelli wasn't teaching evil. He was naming reality. Why truth about power is always punished. Florence, late 15th century. There is no peace here, only pauses between betrayals. Italy is not a nation yet. It is a fractured chessboard of cities, states. Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome, Naples. Alliances shift overnight. Mercenary armies sell loyalty to the highest bidder. Assassinations are not scandals, they are strategy. Foreign powers circle like vultures, waiting for weakness. Power is fragile, trust is lethal, and morality is a luxury few can afford. This is the world Machiavelli was born into. Not a philosopher's study, not a moral classroom, but chaos. Machiavelli did not observe power from a throne. He observed it from the inside, as a diplomat, a civil servant, a witness to collapse. He watched leaders rise through cunning and fall through naivety. He saw republics crumble, not because they were evil, but because they were unprepared. And then he did something unforgivable. He wrote it down. History would later brand him as sinister, cold, ruthless, even demonic. His name would become synonymous with manipulation itself. But that reputation hides a deeper truth. Machiavelli did not teach cruelty. He documented reality. Like a surgeon describing a disease, he dissected power without comforting lies. No moral anesthesia, no fairy tales, just anatomy. And societies have always hated anatomists of power, because illusions stabilize systems, and realism destabilizes them. Most societies survive on stories. That leaders are virtuous, that power is earned, that morality protects the righteous. These narratives are not harmless, they keep people compliant, calm, predictable. Machiavelli shattered those stories. He said what few dared to admit, that rulers often succeed not by being good, but by being effective. That power does not obey moral ideals, it exploits human nature. That pretending otherwise doesn't make the world kinder, it makes people vulnerable. This was not a call to evil, it was a refusal to lie, and refusal to lie is always punished. Machiavelli paid for that clarity with exile, with imprisonment, with torture. He was cast out of political life, not because he ruled cruelly, but because he saw too clearly. His ideas threatened the comforting belief that power could be made safe through virtue alone. Society could forgive brutality, it could forgive corruption, but it could not forgive exposure. Because once people see how power truly works, they stop believing in the myths that keep it smooth. That is why Machiavelli became a villain in hindsight. Not because rulers read him, but because people did. His critics accused him of inventing manipulation. But manipulation existed long before ink touched paper. Kings deceived, priests persuaded, armies terrorized. Crowds were stirred by fear and hope alike. Machiavelli didn't create these tactics, he named them. And naming power is dangerous. Throughout history, those who describe reality honestly are often mistaken for endorsing it. The doctor who diagnoses a disease is accused of causing it. The journalist who exposes corruption is blamed for weakening trust. The thinker who explains manipulation is accused of promoting it. But explanation is not endorsement. Machiavelli did not tell rulers to be cruel. He warned them what happens when they assume others won't be. He did not glorify deception. He explained why honesty without strategy invites exploitation. He did not celebrate tyranny. He showed why idealism without realism collapses. This is why his work still unsettles people centuries later, because it forces an uncomfortable realization: power does not disappear when ignored. It simply operates without your consent. Machiavelli held up a mirror, and humanity recoiled. He showed rulers what they already were, and showed citizens what they were up against. That is why he is remembered not as a neutral observer, but as a corrupter, because it is easier to demonize the messenger than to confront the message. In truth, Machiavelli was none of the monsters history painted him to be. He was a diagnostician, not a tyrant, a mirror, not a mentor of brutality, a warning, not a blueprint. He did not corrupt rulers, he exposed what rulers already were, And in doing so, he committed the oldest crime in political history. He told the truth about power and refused to apologize for it. Sikhainen, human nature under pressure, why manipulation works on almost everyone. There is a comforting belief we cling to, that manipulation only works on the ignorant, that awareness equals immunity, that we would never fall for it. History disagrees. This is where the story turns inward, away from kings and empires and into the human nervous system. Because the most powerful lever of control has never been armies or laws. It has always been the mind under pressure. When danger appears, real or perceived, the brain does not ask philosophical questions. It prepares for survival. Neuroscience tells us that fear narrows perception. The amygdala hijacks attention. Complexity collapses into urgency. Nuance becomes noise. In that state, people do not seek truth. They seek relief. This is why fear has always been power's favorite instrument. Not because people are stupid, but because fear makes them efficient, obedient, decisive, predictable. Desire works the same way, only more quietly. Hope, ambition, the promise of status, these override caution just as effectively as terror. When something is framed as an opportunity to belong, to rise, to matter, skepticism dissolves. We lean forward. We want to believe. Belonging, however, is the most potent force of all. Human beings are tribal creatures long before they are rational ones. To be excluded once meant death. That ancient wiring remains. Social rejection still triggers pain centers in the brain. So when truth threatens belonging, truth is often the first thing sacrificed. This is how manipulation doesn't just persuade, it recruits. Status anxiety completes the circuit. When identity, reputation, or moral standing are on the line, ethics bend. People say what is safe, signal what is approved, attack what is condemned, not because they believe it deeply, but because they cannot afford not to. Machiavelli observed all of this centuries before brain scans existed. He noticed that under pressure, people abandon principles not because they are evil, but because they are adaptive. Morality thrives in stability. It collapses in chaos. Modern behavioral science confirms it. In moments of uncertainty, the brain prioritizes survival over consistency. This is why revolutions radicalize ordinary people, why cults form around fear and belonging, why propaganda states don't need constant violence, only constant tension. Look closely at history. Revolutions rarely begin with cruelty. They begin with narratives of threat. Cults don't recruit skeptics, they recruit the lonely. Totalitarian regimes don't start with terror, they start with moral certainty. And once emotional alignment is achieved, control becomes effortless. Now look at the present. Outrage cycles, algorithmic amplification, permanent crisis. The modern world does not calm the nervous system, it agitates it. Fear is monetized. Anger is rewarded. Tribal identity is reinforced with every click. In this environment, emotional reactivity is not a flaw, it is a resource, and it is harvested constantly. The unsettling realization begins to form. Your strongest emotions are not strengths, they are entry points. Anger makes you predictable. Fear makes you compliant. Belonging makes you silent. Status anxiety makes you lie to yourself. This does not mean emotions are weaknesses to be eliminated. It means they must be understood, because anything unexamined can be used against you. Machiavelli never asked people to become cold. He warned them what happens when they remain unregulated in a world that rewards exploitation. Emotional discipline, then, is not cruelty. It is not detachment from humanity. It is literacy, the ability to read what is happening inside you before someone else reads it for you. Because the most effective manipulation is invisible, it does not feel like coercion. It feels like urgency, like righteousness, like safety. And by the time you realize your reactions were guided, your choices narrowed, your silence trained, the moment has already passed. This is why awareness is dangerous to power, not because it creates rebels, but because it creates pause, and pause breaks the spell. Machiavelli understood something most people still resist. You don't lose freedom all at once. You lose it in moments of unmanaged emotion. And those moments are where power enters, quietly, patiently, waiting for pressure to do the rest. Because in the end, manipulation doesn't conquer the strong. It recruits the unprepared. Saint-Iene v. Law of Power 1. Reactivity is obedience. Those who control their emotions control their fate. The easiest way to control a person is to make them feel something strong. Anger, fear, moral outrage, hope mixed with panic. Because the moment emotion spikes, freedom shrinks. This is the first cold law of power, and the one most people resist hearing. Reactivity is obedience. Not obedience to a king or a tyrant, but obedience to whoever knows how to pull the trigger inside your mind. Watch closely how power operates today, rarely through commands, almost never through force, instead through provocation, a headline designed to enrage, a scandal timed to distract, a moral panic framed as urgency, a threat exaggerated just enough to demand immediate response. And when you react instantly, emotionally, publicly, you believe you are exercising agency. In reality, you are following a script. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago, long before algorithms or media empires. He observed that rulers rarely defeat their enemies directly. They exhaust them emotionally. They provoke missteps. They wait for anger to create mistakes that reason never would. The Stoics said the same thing in different language. If someone can disturb your inner state, they can govern your actions. Modern behavioral economics now confirms it. An emotionally aroused mind becomes predictable. It shortcuts analysis. It seeks confirmation. It overestimates threats and underestimates consequences. It feels certain, and certainty is the most exploitable state of all. This is why outrage feels empowering but leads nowhere, why moral panic spreads faster than truth, why attachment clouds judgment more than ignorance ever could. Emotional people are not weak. They are exposed. Institutions know this. Media knows this. Political movements, corporations, even individuals in your personal life know this. They don't need to silence you. They just need to keep you reacting. Because when you react, you stop choosing. Consider how often behavior is guided not by reason, but by emotional incentives, fear of exclusion, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing status, fear of appearing immoral. So people speak when silence would protect them, attack when patience would serve them, align publicly when doubt would preserve autonomy, and they call this courage. But Machiavelli would call it something else, predictability. And predictability is power's favorite weakness. This is where detachment enters, and where it is most misunderstood. Detachment is not apathy. It is not indifference. It is not emotional numbness. Detachment is delay, the space between stimulus and response, the refusal to be rushed into a reaction that benefits someone else. In that space, power collapses, because without reaction, provocation fails. Without outrage, narratives weaken. Without emotional compliance, manipulation has nothing to grip. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals appear calm while chaos spreads. Not because they feel less, but because they choose when to feel, how to express, and whether to act. Machiavelli admired such restraint not for its morality, but for its effectiveness. A ruler who reacts is ruled by circumstance. A person who reacts is ruled by incentives. A mind that reacts belongs to whoever understands it best. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. How many of your strongest reactions were truly spontaneous, and how many were predictable responses to a familiar trigger? How often do you feel righteous, right before doing exactly what someone else benefits from? This is the trap of emotional obedience. You feel alive, you feel certain, you feel morally justified. And all the while, your options narrow. The first law of power is not about domination. It is about self-governance, because the one thing power cannot tolerate is a person who cannot be rushed, someone who pauses, observes, lets the emotional wave pass without riding it. Such a person becomes difficult to steer, difficult to provoke, difficult to use. And that is why every system built on manipulation works over time to keep you reactive. Because the moment you control your emotions, you stop being useful to anyone who needs you obedient. Machiavelli didn't teach people to feel less. He warned them what happens when they feel without awareness. Because in a world where provocation is constant, the calm mind is not passive, it is sovereign. Cecitone v. Law of power. 2a. Control the narrative or be trapped inside one. Reality is what people believe. There is a brutal truth few people want to face. Reality is not what happens. Reality is what people believe happened. Empires have risen on this principle, so have religions, revolutions, corporations, and reputations. The battlefield of power is not the courtroom, the marketplace, or the streets. It is the story told about those places. Machiavelli understood this long before social media, long before mass communication. He saw that facts alone rarely decide outcomes. Interpretation does. Framing does. Timing does. Truth whispered at the wrong moment dies quietly. A lie repeated confidently becomes memory. History proves this again and again. Victors are remembered as heroes. Losers are remembered as villains, regardless of motive, morality, or truth. Because narratives do not emerge organically. They are constructed, and once constructed, they are defended as reality itself. This is why silence is never neutral. When you remain silent while others speak about you, you do not preserve truth, you surrender definition. The void will be filled, and it will not be kind. Machiavelli warned rulers that appearing virtuous mattered more than being virtuous, not because morality was irrelevant, but because perception governs trust, loyalty, and legitimacy. People do not follow facts, they follow stories that feel coherent. This is why reputations collapse faster than evidence can save them. Why accusations travel faster than corrections. Why moral labels stick long after context disappears. In modern society, this machinery has been perfected. Public relations, political messaging, corporate branding, algorithmic amplification. The same principle applies everywhere. Control the frame, and you control the meaning. A policy framed as security feels different from the same policy framed as control. A protest framed as justice is treated differently than one framed as disruption. A person framed as controversial is heard differently than one framed as dangerous. Nothing has changed, only the speed. Machiavelli would recognize this world instantly. He would see that power no longer needs to imprison dissenters when it can redefine them. No longer needs to silence critics when it can discredit them. No longer needs to crush resistance when it can narrate it into irrelevance. The most effective control today is reputational, because once your narrative is hijacked, every action you take is interpreted through someone else's lens. Defend yourself and you look guilty. Remain silent and you look complicit. Explain and you look defensive. This is the trap of living inside a narrative you didn't create. And here is the chilling realization. If you do not define yourself, the world will define you, and rarely kindly. This is not a call to manipulate, it is a warning about vulnerability. Narratives are not optional. You are always inside one. The only question is whether you are conscious of it. Machiavelli advised rulers to think in appearances, not because he loved deception, but because he understood how humans process reality. People do not audit truth, they absorb impressions. And impressions are shaped by what is said first, what is repeated, what is emotionally charged, what is socially reinforced. Facts come later, if they come at all. This is why timing often matters more than content, why a message delivered too early is ignored, and the same message delivered during fear becomes law, why silence at the wrong moment becomes guilt, why speaking at the wrong moment becomes suicide. Power does not reward honesty without strategy. It rewards coherence, a story that fits expectations, a narrative that aligns with identity, a frame that simplifies complexity into moral clarity. And those who control the frame do not need to argue. They simply let belief do the work. This law does not demand dishonesty. It demands awareness. Awareness that truth without framing is fragile. That silence without strategy is surrender. That narratives are weapons whether you acknowledge them or not. Machiavelli's lesson is not better. It is, do not be naive enough to believe facts defend themselves. Because in a world ruled by perception, the undefended truth is the easiest thing to erase. And those who ignore the narrative battlefield don't remain neutral. They become casualties inside a story written by someone else. Setion v. Law of Power N3E. Transparency protects observers, not players. Why mystery is insulation. We are told that openness is virtue, that transparency builds trust, that visibility equals honesty. But power operates by a colder rule. Transparency protects those who watch, not those who act. Every system that demands your exposure benefits from knowing more about you than you know about it. This is not paranoia. It is structure. In espionage, the first asset compromised is not loyalty, it is information. Spies do not need to control you if they can predict you. Negotiators do not need to intimidate you if they can read your intentions before you speak. The moment your goals are known, the game is already tilted. Machiavelli warned rulers against unnecessary exposure, not because secrecy was immoral, but because visibility creates vulnerability. To be fully known is to be fully manageable. Information is not neutral, it is leverage, and leverage only moves one way. Information cannot be taken back. Once revealed, it can be reframed. Once documented, it can be recontextualized. Once public, it no longer belongs to you. Modern life has inverted this logic. We are encouraged to overshare our values, our plans, our fears, our doubts, under the promise of authenticity. But authenticity in a competitive environment is not bravery. It is exposure without protection. Corporations study consumer vulnerability. Platforms reward confession with visibility. Institutions collect transparency and return surveillance. The more you reveal, the easier you are to categorize, the easier you are to predict, the easier you are to steer. This is why powerful institutions rarely overshare. They publish statements, not intentions. They release narratives, not internal conflicts. They show outcomes, not deliberations. Visibility is curated. Mystery is preserved. Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable. Trust does not require full disclosure. Stability does not require confession. Strength does not require explanation. Those who reveal everything do not become trusted, they become readable. And readability is a liability. In negotiation psychology, this is known as asymmetric disclosure. The party who speaks first reveals more or signals urgency loses leverage. Silence forces the other side to project guess. Silence creates asymmetry. Asymmetry creates advantage. This does not mean deception, it means containment. Mystery is not lying, it is insulation. Insulation against misinterpretation, against premature judgment, against opportunistic interference. In the digital age, this lesson becomes even sharper. Every post, every statement, every emotional confession becomes data. Algorithms do not empathize, they classify, they optimize. They amplify what makes you predictable. Visibility feels empowering until it is used against you. Careers end not because of actions, but because of screenshots. Reputations collapse not because of intent, but because of context stripped away. People are punished not for wrongdoing, but for misalignment with a moment. Machiavelli would see this clearly. He would recognize that constant visibility is not freedom, it is exposure without armor. That vulnerability shared in public becomes leverage in private. That those who demand transparency rarely offer it equally. This law does not argue for isolation. It argues for selectivity. Who knows your plans? Who hears your doubts? Who has access to your internal world? Power favors those who can be observed without being understood. Those who speak strategically, reveal incrementally, and keep their inner motives unreadable to those who have not earned access. Because once your intentions are fully visible, you no longer control the pace. Others move first. Others frame your actions. Others prepare counters before you even act. Transparency may feel moral, but morality without strategy is exposure. Machiavelli's warning echoes louder now than ever. Not everything true must be said. Not everything felt must be shown. Not everything known must be shared. In a world that watches constantly, mystery is not manipulation. It is protection. And those who mistake exposure for honesty often learn too late that what they revealed in good faith was never received in good faith at all. Sction Visiden. Law of power re foreign morality is often used to control the moral, goodness as a predictable weakness. Good people rarely expect to be used. That is why they are. This is the paradox at the heart of power. Morality creates trust, but trust creates exposure. And exposure in an unequal world invites exploitation. This section begins with an uncomfortable truth. Rigid morality is not strength. It is a pattern, and patterns are easy to manipulate. Good people assume shared rules. They believe others are playing the same ethical game, that fairness will be reciprocated, that honesty will be rewarded, that restraint will be respected. Manipulators depend on this assumption, because the moment one side plays by rules the other does not recognize, the outcome is already decided. Machiavelli saw this clearly, not because he hated virtue, but because he observed how virtue collapses when it is naive. Ethical consistency becomes predictability. Predictability becomes leverage. If you always tell the truth, you can be baited with lies. If you always forgive, you can be repeatedly harmed. If you always play fair, you can be defeated by those who do not. This is not cynicism, it is pattern recognition. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli intuited centuries ago. Humans are loss-averse, socially sensitive, and deeply motivated by moral identity. We fear being seen as bad more than we fear being treated unfairly. That fear becomes a handle. Moral language is powerful because it bypasses logic and goes straight to identity. You're being selfish. You're on the wrong side of history. A good person wouldn't question this. These phrases are not arguments. They are control mechanisms. They trigger shame, compliance, not understanding. The world does not punish evil consistently. History proves this relentlessly. It punishes weakness disguised as virtue, especially when that virtue refuses to adapt. Revolutions are filled with idealists who believed purity would protect them. Organizations are full of conscientious workers exploited by those willing to bend rules quietly. Relationships are destroyed when one person's conscience becomes another's leverage. Goodness becomes a liability when it is inflexible. Not because goodness is wrong, but because blindness is. Machiavelli never argued that ethics should be abandoned. He argued that ethics without awareness are dangerous. That morality must be contextual, not absolute. That survival precedes virtue, because dead ideals help no one. The truly dangerous people are not immoral. They are morally strategic. They use the language of ethics to control those who take ethics seriously. They know where the moral lines are and stand just behind them, pushing others forward. This is how moral traps are set. You are shamed for defending yourself, condemned for questioning incentives, labeled dangerous for noticing contradictions. The moment morality becomes a weapon, those who refuse to examine it become casualties. This does not mean becoming cruel. It means becoming aware. Ethics are strongest when they are flexible enough to survive contact with reality, when they are grounded in outcomes, not appearances, when they are defended intelligently, not performatively. Machiavelli's warning was not, be evil. It was, do not confuse virtue with vulnerability. The moral person who understands power can choose restraint. The moral person who ignores power is ruled by it. This is where modern society becomes particularly dangerous. Moral outrage is amplified, monetized, and weaponized at scale. Institutions learn to control behavior not through force, but through virtue signaling and public shaming. You are not told what to think. You are told what a good person would think, and dissent becomes immoral by definition. The chilling realization emerges slowly. Most moral pressure is not about justice. It is about compliance. Those who resist are not argued with, they are framed. Those who ask questions are not answered, they are labeled. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. He would see that morality has become a theater, and those who mistake the stage for reality are the easiest to direct. True ethics require courage, courage to see complexity, courage to refuse simple narratives, courage to defend principles without becoming predictable. Because once your goodness can be anticipated, it can be used. This law does not ask you to abandon your values. It asks you to protect them, to understand when morality is guiding you, and when it is being used to guide you somewhere you did not choose. The world will always praise virtue in public and exploit it in private. The question is not whether you are moral. The question is whether your morality is aware enough to survive the world it lives in. Because goodness without awareness does not make you righteous. It makes you manageable. As Aun Vedi, law of power, when fefiv, make yourself necessary, not loved. Dependence outlasts admiration. They will smile at you until they no longer need you. This is one of the coldest lessons in the anatomy of power, and one of the most reliable. Likability is fragile, utility is durable, history is littered with beloved figures who were discarded the moment their usefulness faded. Advisors praised for wisdom one season, the next. Employees celebrated as family, then replaced without ceremony. Allies toasted in public, sacrificed in private. Affection feels like protection, but dependence is protection. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He observed that rulers rarely defend those they admire, but they will fiercely defend what their survival relies on. Love invites sentiment, necessity invites calculation, and calculation is far more loyal. Consider the difference. A liked person is optional, a necessary person creates cost. When your absence causes disruption, hesitation appears. Decisions slow. Power reconsiders. Dependence introduces friction into betrayal. This is not manipulation, it is structural leverage. Modern psychology calls this dependence theory. People protect resources that reduce uncertainty. The more irreplaceable a function becomes, the more anxiety its loss creates. Scarcity sharpens attention. Replacement anxiety disciplines behavior. Admiration, by contrast, is emotional, and emotions collapse under pressure. In times of crisis, people abandon sentiment and cling to function. This is why indispensable individuals are often tolerated even when disliked, while likable individuals are discarded when inconvenient. Utility overrides comfort. Always, Machiavelli warned against confusing affection with security. Love, he observed, is governed by obligation, and obligation dissolves when circumstances change. Necessity, however, binds regardless of mood. The world rarely asks. It asks, what can we afford to lose? Modern workplaces disguise this truth behind language of culture and belonging. But incentives do not lie. Those who solve irreplaceable problems are given latitude. Those who only maintain harmony are given compliments. And compliments do not stop exits. To be necessary is not to hoard power. It is to position yourself where removal creates risk. It means cultivating skills, access, insight, or coordination that cannot be easily replicated. It means becoming a stabilizing node in a fragile system. This is why power often appears quiet. It does not beg to be seen. It waits to be required. Machiavelli would argue that necessity creates a form of passive authority. You do not need to threaten. You do not need to dominate. The system itself begins to protect you. This is also why those who rely on likability often feel betrayed. They thought praise was loyalty. They thought warmth was insurance, but admiration evaporates under stress. when resources shrink, when reputations are on the line, when someone must be sacrificed, people protect what they need. This law is uncomfortable because it challenges modern narratives of authenticity and goodwill. But it does not demand cruelty, it demands realism. Be kind, but be useful. Be respected, but be necessary. Because the moment your value becomes replaceable, your protection becomes negotiable, and power does not negotiate with what it can afford to lose. The final truth settles in quietly. People may praise you, but they protect what they need. Stunx, the modern age obedience without chains, algorithms, reputation, silent control. Power has learned a new language. It no longer commands, it curates. In the modern age, obedience is not enforced through fear of punishment, but fear of exclusion. Control does not arrive with soldiers. It arrives with algorithms, metrics, visibility, and silence. Chains are no longer necessary when compliance is voluntary. Machiavelli could not have imagined the tools, but he would have recognized the strategy instantly. Because modern power does not silence dissent, it makes dissent expensive. Algorithms decide what is amplified and what disappears. Reputation systems remember longer than people do. Visibility becomes currency, and invisibility becomes a warning. The message is never explicit, yet always understood. Conform or be ignored. Align or be buried. Perform or vanish. This is obedience without force. Social platforms reward predictability. Outrage is boosted, nuance is punished. Moral certainty travels faster than complexity. Over time, users learn what is safe to say, what is risky to question, and what must never be noticed. Self-censorship replaces censorship. You are not told to stay quiet. You learn that speaking costs reach, status, opportunity, so you adapt. This is the most efficient form of control ever devised because it recruits the individual as the enforcer. You become the guard of your own limits. Reputation economies deepen this effect. Public perception becomes permanent, searchable, and compressible into labels. One misstep can outweigh years of context. Redemption is not impossible, but it is algorithmically inconvenient, so people preemptively obey. They signal correctness, avoid ambiguity, align with dominant narratives, not because they are convinced, but because they are cautious. Machiavelli warned that power prefers stability over truth. The modern world has perfected this preference. Dissent is allowed, but only if it remains ineffective. You may speak as long as no one hears you. The illusion of freedom remains intact. After all, no one is stopping you. But the consequences train behavior more effectively than force ever could. This is why modern power feels invisible. There is no tyrant to overthrow, no law to rebel against, only incentives quietly shaping behavior, and the most chilling realization emerges: modern power doesn't silence you. It trains you to silence yourself. It does not need loyalty, only predictability. Machiavelli would recognize this as the evolution of control, from coercion to conditioning, from violence to optimization, from fear of punishment to fear of irrelevance. The question is no longer, what am I allowed to say? It is, what will this cost me? And when cost becomes too high, silence feels like choice. This is the final environment in which the ancient laws of power now operate. Faster, quieter, and more personalized than ever before. The chains are gone, but obedience remains, and those who do not learn to see it will continue to mistake adaptation for freedom, while the system smiles, records, and adjusts. Because the most stable form of rule is the one you no longer recognize as rule at all. Stunx, final integration awareness, is the only exit. Rule consciously, or be ruled unknowingly. There is a moment, quiet, uncomfortable, when the noise fades and a question remains. Not who rules the world, but how often you've been ruled without noticing. Because power does not announce itself anymore. It does not wear crowns or carry whips. It whispers through incentives. It hides in habits. It disguises itself as common sense. And this is where Machiavelli returns one last time, not as a conqueror of others, but as a guide through illusion. He was never teaching domination for its own sake. He was teaching recognition, because manipulation does not require villains. It only requires unawareness. You've seen the pattern now. How emotions are provoked to narrow your choices. How narratives decide who is trusted and who is erased. How morality is used as a leash on those who refuse to abandon it. How dependence, not admiration, determines who survives pressure. How modern power doesn't silence dissent, it makes dissent expensive. Machiavelli's most misunderstood lesson was never, be ruthless. It was this: innocence is not protection. The world does not reward those who mean well. It responds to those who see clearly. This is the final integration, the point where all the laws collapse into one truth. You are always being influenced. The only question is whether you recognize it. Because when manipulation is invisible, it feels like choice. When control is subtle, it feels like preference. When obedience is normalized, it feels like morality. And that is the most dangerous form of power, the kind that convinces you it isn't there. Machiavelli understood something deeply uncomfortable, that pretending the game doesn't exist doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you predictable. And predictability is the currency of control. This is why awareness is the only exit. Not domination, not revenge, not becoming what you fear, but the ability to pause, to notice the emotional surge before it carries you, to question the narrative before it defines you, to choose silence before information becomes a weapon against you, to recognize when moral language is being used to corner, not enlighten. Awareness doesn't make you powerful over others. It makes you harder to move, harder to provoke him, harder to manipulate. And that, quietly, is the most subversive position of all, because power thrives on reflex, on speed, on outrage, but it struggles against those who refuse to react on command. This is the difference between ruling and being ruled. Not ruling others, but ruling yourself, your attention, your emotions, your beliefs. Machiavelli was not offering a blueprint for tyranny. He was leaving behind a warning label, a reminder that the world does not run on intentions, it runs on incentives. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The question is no longer whether power exists. You've already answered that. The question is whether you will continue to outsource your awareness to trends, to outrage, to narratives written by someone else, or whether you will step back, observe, and choose consciously. Because now that you see the game, will you keep pretending it isn't real?